Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are well and I hope you guys are staying safe. In this week's tutorial, we're going to be sewing this dress, and if you don't know, last week we made the pattern, so if you haven't seen it, check out the link in the description box as well as the one in the iCards above. Shout out to Kim Day for this gorgeous video. Okay, so let's get straight into it. To start off, we're going to cut out our pieces, and of course you need the pattern pieces we drafted last week. So I'll be starting with the skirt pieces. You want to have the front skirt and the back pieces. Lay your fabric on your cutting table, and this fabric I got from Calico Lane. I'll put their Instagram in the description box. Now I'm starting with the front piece, and I'm making sure to pin it on the folded edge, right? Pin the center front on the folded edge, and I left about 2.5–3 inches at the bottom intentionally. Now after pinning it all the way through, I went ahead to mark out my sewing allowances, and that's 1/2 inch at the top, which is around the waist area, 1 inch at the side seam, which is just what I wanted, and then at the bottom I went ahead to do 1.5 inches, and this was very intentional for me. So go ahead and mark out your sewing allowances based on what you need, and then you want to go ahead and cut it out. Right after cutting the front piece for the skirt, we're going to move over to the back piece for the skirt. So you want to grab your center back pattern. You want to place that at the bottom of your fabric. I'm basically maximizing my fabric here, so I'm just going to place it at the bottom. I'm going to pin the pattern in place. Now, one thing to call out is at the center back, you will need to add allowance. Remember that the center front was cut and fold. However, because of the presence of the zipper, you need to add allowance at the center back. Mark out your allowances, your sewing and seam allowances. At the bottom, I'm using 1.5 inches, which is what I've maintained, 1 inch at the center back, 1 inch at the side seam, and 1/2 inch at the waist level. Whatever you use is fine, and then go ahead and cut this out. After cutting it, we're going to move over to the bodice pieces. Go ahead and pin your bodice onto the fabric. So I know typically your front will be on fold, which will be like the center front area. However, because of the style of this Pinafore dress, the front is not on fold. So go ahead and pin your bodice in place or your pattern pieces in place, mark out the sewing allowance and cut it. For the bodice, I predominantly use 1/2 inch all around, except at the side seam, which is where I use 1 inch, and of course at the center back for the back pieces, then I use 1 inch as well. So cut out the pieces as shown, and after that you should have all your bodice pieces. I went ahead to cut out all my pieces in lining as well, so basically just placed all of this on the lining fabric and I cut it out. And also for the bodies, I wanted to add in some interfacing just to give it a bit of stability, so I went ahead to use iron on stay, and this is me ironing on the stay onto the bodice pieces. Now this is absolutely optional, you don't have to use any interfacing if you don't want to. However, I do recommend that you line your dress. If you're not using any interfacing, I suggest that you skip this part and then just go straight to your sewing. So starting with the front pieces, you want to go ahead and unpin them from their pattern. I will always start with the main fabric, so put away your lining pieces, making sure that you have them in place and you don't get confused. And then we're going to start with the center front pieces. One of the ways that helps me to not get confused when I'm sewing is to visualize what I'm sewing. So I lay the center front pieces on the table facing each other as it should be on your body. Then I lay the side front pieces on it as well on the table so that it's literally the way it should be. Now that I know what it should look like, I went ahead to, just turn it over. So I placed the center front on the side front piece like so. And then starting from the bottom, I pinned it in place on the left and on the right hand side. You're going to do this for both sides, right? So pin it from the bottom all the way to the top, and then after pinning, you want to mark out your sewing allowance of 1/2 inch because that's what I left. Now this is what it looks like after pinning. Go ahead and sew it in place. Of course, I'm using my Janome HD9 Professional sewing machine. You guys know how much I love this sewing machine because she goes through all of this sewing like literally like a breeze. After sewing the main fabric, please remember to sew the lining. You'll be doing the exact same thing for the lining, so I'm not going to show the process here. You basically want to sew the center front to the side front on one side and on the other side as well. So at this point, I'm done sewing. This is what it looks like. I'm going ahead to give it a good iron just so that you can open up your seams. And I find that this process, pressing your garments during production, is very important. So go ahead and give it a good press, and then after that, you want to go ahead to make sure that you hold the seams in place. For anyone wondering, that wooden thing I'm using is called a clapper, and it helps you during your ironing or pressing process to make sure that seams are as flat as possible. I highly recommend it as I feel like it's elevated my sewing. Like I said, I went ahead to sew the lining as well. So the next thing we're going to do is going to close the neckline. I went ahead to top stitch my lining, so I highly recommend that you guys do that. Place the lining on the main fabric so the right sides are facing each other, and then go ahead and sew along the neckline, which is the part I'm just showing you now. After sewing, top stitch if you can, and this is what it looks like when it's done, right? I feel like it's really neat. You can see I went ahead to top stitch, and this is what the front pieces look like. We're going to move straight onto the back pieces as well. Moving over to the back pieces, you're going to repeat the same thing. So separate your lining from your main fabric, and then go ahead and lay the center back on the table just as it should be. That way you're visualizing it, right? If you need to trim off any excess airstay or interfacing that you have. Then you want to go ahead and lay the side back onto where it should be, just so that you can see it. Pin it in place like I've done, and then go ahead and sew it on 1/2 inch sewing allowance. You want to repeat the same thing for your lining. After sewing, this is what the lining looks like. Go ahead and place the main fabric on the lining fabric so that the right sides are facing each other. And then you want to go ahead and pin the neckline in place. For this, the neckline is just a round neck, so it's really small. So go ahead and pin that in place. Once you're done pinning the neckline, and of course this has to be done on the other side as well, you want to go ahead and mark out your sewing allowance of 1/2 inch, and then go ahead and sew this in place. When it comes to necklines, I always recommend you notching and also top stitching. So this is the result after sorting out the neckline. I went ahead to top stitch and also notch. At this point, we're going to go ahead and join the shoulders for the front and the back. So place the front on the corresponding back so that the right sides are facing each other. If it helps, you can go ahead and spread it open so you have the lining separated from the main fabric on the back, and then place the front so that the lining is also separated from the main fabric. At this point, you want to make sure that when you're joining the front and the back, the seams align, all your lining aligns, the shoulder seam aligns, all your seams and stitches align. Pin it in place, and then go ahead and sew it in place on 1/2 inch. After sewing, this is what it looks like. You can go ahead and give it a good iron, but you can see all the seams are in place. And of course, like I said, I used my clapper to make sure the seams were held down. After sewing the shoulders on both sides, this is what it looks like I said. Now we want to go ahead and finish off the armhole. For the armhole, you want to flip it over like I've just done, and then you want to go ahead and pin. It's important that you start pinning from the middle, which is the shoulder point, and work your ways towards the armhole or the end area where the side seam is. Once you're done pinning this one, you want to go ahead and pin the second one. Like I said, you want to do this carefully. After pinning, go ahead and sew it in place on 1/2 inch, and then of course notch, because this is the armhole and it's a curved area. Once you're done notching, go ahead and turn it inside out just like I'm doing. It might be a bit tricky, but don't worry, it is definitely possible. So bring it over to the right side, and you want to repeat this again like I said for the other side. After doing that, give it a good iron, and you can see that once you iron it, it would all ease out and all the wrinkles will be out. Once ironed, this is what it looks like. Now the next thing for us to do is to sort out the side seam. So basically we're going to go ahead with one, and we're going to go ahead and open it up from the armhole area, so where the armhole ends, and then we're going to go ahead and place it on each other. So at this point, I want you guys to pay attention. I want to open up the armhole, so the main fabric from the lining, and then I'm going to pin the front and back pieces around the armhole where they meet. Again, you want to ensure that your seams meet, and then you want to make sure the right side of the main fabric facing each other for the back and front, and then the right side of the lining fabric facing each other. After that, go ahead and sew it on 1/2 inch, on 1 inch sewing allowance rather, 1 inch, not 1/2 inch, pardon me. After sewing, this is what it looks like. As you can see, the sides are all done, and at this point your bodice is practically ready. Moving over to the skirt, let's go ahead and start. I always recommend that you notch the center of the skirt, both the lining and the main fabric, as well as the center around the waist. So the hem and the waist, you notch it, and then you want to go ahead and unpin it. At this point, you want to mark your wrong side so that you don't get confused, and we're going to open it so that the right side is facing us. Then we're going to lay our lining piece on it, right? And then we're going to go ahead and pin starting from the center notch. You want to pin towards the sides on the left and on the right hand side. And I know if you didn't notice, I'm going to call it out. The lining is actually 1.5 inches shorter, and this was very intentional to give you a very nice finished look. Once you're done pinning, go ahead and sew it along the hem at 1/2 inch, and this is the result. As you can see, it's really neat and nice and professionally finished in my opinion. After finishing the front skirt, we're going to move over to the back. So again, in similar fashion, notch wherever you need to notch so that you can tell the difference and know where to pair the lining and the main fabric. And then go ahead and hold the center back in place with some pins so that you can tell that that's the center back, right? After that, we're going to go ahead and open up the main fabric so that the front is facing us. And then we're going to lay the lining fabric on top of the main fabric so the right sides are facing each other, right? So after doing this, again, you want to go ahead and pin the hem and sew it on 1/2 inch like we did for the front. This is the result, and as you can see, it looks nice. Now at this point, I know it looks like I finished the center back, which I actually did. However, I had to loosen it because I noticed that it was going to cause a problem the way I wanted to finish the garment. I wanted all like the hems to be nicely finished, so I knew that I couldn't do the ends like that, the back like that. So I went ahead to loosen that later, as you saw. But go ahead and place the front on the back, right, for the skirt pieces, and then we're going to go ahead and pin separately. So you want to pin the main fabric separate from the lining and pin it all the way and sew on 1 inch, right? So hold your main fabric all the way to the end and sew it. After sewing the sides, this is what it looks like. I went ahead to sew the sides, and like I said, I did it separately. So main fabric, I went ahead to sew in one continuous line to the lining. At this point, I need to join the bodice to the skirt. So I'm taking out the pins that I have holding the lining and the main fabric for the skirt. And then just making sure that while it's flat, I only have like the main fabric. Then I go ahead and arrange the bodice as it should be. But this time I'm holding the lining and the bodice main fabric together. And I'm pinning it in place onto the skirt, making sure the side seams match, right? So you want to make sure the side seam of the bodice matches the skirt. Pin it in place, and also making sure the center back also matches. What you'll notice is that the center front of your bodice should be at the notched area of the skirt, right, where I notched. So you want to repeat this on the other side as well. Remember that the bodice are not joined, the left and right hand side are not joined, but they will be overlapping. So again, on the other side, you want to find the side seam and make sure you pin it in place, and then you want to work your ways pinning to the left and to the right. At the center front, it should overlap literally just on top of each other by 1/2 inch. After that, sew it in place on 1/2 inch, and this is what it looks like. At this point, we've sewn the bodice onto the skirt, but only the bodice, right? And this is what it looks like. Now we're going to cover this up with our lining in a sandwich method. So essentially the bodice will be sandwiched into the skirt main fabric and the skirt lining. Fold the lining fabric over just like I've just done so that the bodice is sandwiched in between the main fabric and the lining for the skirt, and then go ahead and ensure that the side seams match for the lining to the main fabric and the bodice, and then pin it in place. So we're basically just repeating what we did when we were sewing the bodice to the main fabric, making sure all the seams align and then pinning it in place. After doing this, you want to go ahead and sew it on 1/2 inch sewing allowance as well. So if possible, you can sew it on the exact same line that you had before. Flip your dress over to the right side, give it a good iron, and this is what it looks like. Now the next thing for us to do is to sort out the zipper. So you want to go ahead and flip this over to the wrong side, which is the lining side, and we're going to lay it on the table, and then we're going to go ahead and pin it in place. So while it's on the wrong side, starting from the neckline all the way to the hem, you want to pin it in place. Now the next thing I'm also going to do is I want to go ahead and mark where I'm going to sew. So I know that my zipper will be around 8 inches or 8.5 inches after the waistline. So from the waistline, I'm going to mark 8.5 inches down, and then from that point I'm going to go ahead and mark my sewing allowance of 1 inch, and I'm going to sew that in place. After sewing that in place, to keep the edges nice and keep them from fraying, I went ahead with my overlocking machine from Janome, and I just went ahead to finish the edges. Again, at this point you're working with your lining and your main fabric as one, so I'm doing that together, and you're going to do that for the left and the right hand side so that it looks really nicely finished, right? After overlocking, this is what it looks like, and as you can see, I've gone ahead to sort out the ends of the dress where there will be no zipper, and also gone ahead to overlock it. Now flipping it over to the right side, I'm going to go ahead and install my zipper. I didn't record the process of installing the zipper, but I'm sure a lot of you know how to. If you want a tutorial, let me know. After installing the invisible zipper, this is what it looks like. At this point, the dress is practically finished. I'm very happy with the result. However, I wanted to embellish it and just add some buttons. To do that, I went ahead to fold the dress into two, making sure it was really equal so that I could find the center front position of the dress. And then after finding the center front position of the dress, I played around with some buttons and decided on one to use, and I also played around with the arrangement of the buttons. At this point, you have the creative freedom to do whatever you want to do. If you're not looking to add any buttons onto your pinafore dress, then at this point you're practically finished and your dress is all done. However, like I said, I wanted to add embellishments or buttons to mine, so I went ahead to play around with the button type as well as the button arrangements. I settled on a nice button arrangement, and then I went ahead to sew it in place with my hand needle and thread. At this point, after sewing it, my dress was actually finished and I was really happy with the result. Thank you so much for watching this to the very end, guys. I hope it was worth your while and I hope you enjoyed it. See you next week. Bye.